How was Luffy able to take this fatal blow from Kaido just to restart his own heart and unlock Gear 5th out of nowhere? Is it really just his imagination running wild with the powers of a god? Or does it tap into an ability that we are already more familiar with, such as the energy steroids or maybe even Sulong form? I mean, after all of these turned completely white and obtained similar red eyes. I touched on this a little bit in my last video about the false god Nika, which segues perfectly into this video because today I'm going to focus more on Gear 5th itself and what happens to Luffy's body whenever he enters into it. And before we enter into the rest of the video, please take a second to drop a like and subscribe. Your support has been downright tremendous, and I honestly can't believe that we're almost already at 1,000 subscribers. And I have big plans for the channel going forward, and they only get bigger as more of you guys keep subscribing, so please make sure to click that button down below. But on to the theory.
Yeah.
Luffy's body undergoes two significant changes, at least, whenever he enters into Gear 5th. The first is the different heartbeat that sounds like the drums of liberation, as well as the all-white appearance with the red ringed eyes. Of course, Gear 5th comes with many other capabilities outside of the norm, but the heartbeat and the appearance seem to be the two kind of static or necessary changes that have to be active to even be in Gear 5th. So these are the two that I want to focus on the most. And maybe one of the first things that you're already thinking is that these transformations are just part of his Zoan transformation, or maybe his Zoan awakening. I mean, Kaido even mentioned how his transformation was more like a Zoan than a paramecia. But if you haven't seen my last video on the false god Nika, which I definitely recommend you do, and I'll go ahead and link it down below, I give a great argument for why Luffy's fruit is still just the Gomu Gomu no Mi, and the Nika name is just a legend passed down through time. Now, while I won't cover that entire video here, one thing that you need to know is that Road to Laugh-Tale told us that Zoan awakenings do not affect their environment. And since Luffy did just that immediately throws the Zoan part into question. And the only part to Luffy's awakening that even makes us question the paramecia side is that all-white transformation, and that's basically what Kaido even told him. However, we have seen an eerily similar transformation on a few occasions throughout the story, and none of those required any type of devil fruit. And since transformations occur all the time without zones or even devil fruits being involved at all, I think it's much easier to justify Luffy just being a paramecia who simply tapped into one of these other transformations than him suddenly being some mythical god zone that also has these powers specific to a very specific paramecia. And if this still doesn't quite get you on board with Luffy's fruit still being the Gomu Gomu, let's take a deeper dive into what happens to Luffy's body when he does enter into Gear 5th. And I think it's best to start with a play-by-play of Luffy's awakening across chapters 10, 43, 44, and 45. And it all started when Kaido literally killed Luffy thanks to the help from the CP0 member, and we know that Luffy is 100% dead because we can even see the heartbeat flatline, and we also get to see everyone react to Luffy's voice being gone. So I think it's pretty clear that Luffy was actually dead. However, before chapter 1043 even ends, we get this infamous page with Luffy's heartbeat picking back up and him grinning while Zunisha claims that Joy Boy has returned. So let's pause there and think back to any other times that somebody outright died but somehow had their heart start beating again. Maybe like one of the most badass moments in the entire series when Enel restarted his own heart by using his lightning fruit after Wiper hit him with the dial. Isn't it weird that these two supposed gods were both able to come back to life thanks to their fruit's power? I mean, while Enel's might be kind of obvious, he used his powers just like a defibrillator. Clear. How could Luffy possibly manage that same feat? Well, if Luffy is truly just made of rubber and nothing more as I described earlier, how could a rubber boy manage to restart his own rubber heart on his own? Well, if the entire point of the awakening is to use your imagination to stretch at will, as the Gorosei mentioned, is it possible that Gear 5 is only obtained by imagining your own heart beating? So once your body and heart give out because they've hit their physical limit, you can use your awakened powers to imagine the heart contracting and expanding again so that it pumps your blood again and keeps you alive. But the heart rate that the heart beats at would matter a lot. I mean, obviously in real life blood pressure is a big deal, but even in One Piece we have already seen how important blood pressure is, with Gear 2nd. And what a coincidence, when Luffy entered back into Gear 5th the second time, he did so using the famous Gear 2 pose. We know that when he usually goes into that pose, he starts pumping his blood faster to increase his strength and speed. Because his body is rubber, it can handle much more than a normal human body can. So maybe Gear 5th works in a similar way to Gear 2nd, but because the heartbeat is only limited by his imagination, he may be able to increase it, or at least alter the heart rate, much more than he is capable of in Gear 2nd. And perhaps instead of only the heart rate, there are also hormones or something else involved. And before you call me crazy, don't forget that Ivankov uses hormones to change appearance drastically, even changing between male and female. Ivankov could also use hormones to cure poison and give Luffy an energy boost. I mean, in real life, adrenaline is a huge hormone that makes us stronger and faster temporarily. So maybe Gear 5th not only affects the blood pressure like Gear 2nd, but Luffy's body also secretes some types of hormones that change his appearance temporarily. It's almost like Gear 5th is just Gear 2nd on steroids, which is weird since we have literally seen steroids in the story that make people look like they're in Gear 5th. It's like Luffy is doping himself to a level similar to that of the energy steroids from Fishman Island. I mean, when Luffy used Gear 2 versus Lucci even commented on how Luffy was essentially using his fruit to dope himself and become stronger. So if Luffy could maximize that doping, either through increased heart rate or some oddly specific heart rate, then he should be even stronger, as strong as his imagination allows in this case. This might even explain why his personality changes a little bit in this form. I mean, he still is Luffy, but he's laughing all the time and not taking things very seriously. It's almost like his heartbeat makes him lose touch with reality a little bit, and that's why his imagination is able to run wild, just like we saw against Kaido. I mean, it sounds crazy, but something like this could be totally why Roger laughed at Laugh Tale and wanted to meet Joy Boy. So this is where I think the sound of the heartbeat comes into play, because it apparently sounds like the drums of liberation. I think it's pretty clear that the drums are simply the sound of the heartbeat beating at whatever rate lets him enter into Gear 5th. I think that whoever Joy Boy was probably had to use the same exact heartbeat in order to tap into Gear 5th. And so when that occurred, Zunisha recognized it right away. That tells me that 800 years ago, people that Joy Boy saved probably called his heartbeat the drums of liberation, because that sound meant that you were going to be saved by Joy Boy. This also makes me wonder if there are other sounds he can make with his heartbeat that access other modes of Gear 5, similar to the various forms of Gear 4. And as we saw during the fight, Gear 5th drains Luffy pretty substantially, similar to that of the energy steroids, but maybe because his body is rubber, it allows him to not be as affected as most people are. This makes me also think that the energy steroids are just way more important than we realize, potentially even tying all the way back to Joy Boy. But Hody was able to reproduce them, so it isn't like the steroids are made with some rare ingredients or require some Vegapunk level brain power to make. So perhaps these were actually a cheap knockoff of Gear 5th, or maybe they were meant for Joy Boy to eat so that he can enter Gear 5th easier. If you have another idea, let me know down below, because I honestly don't have a good answer for what these pills were for originally. At any rate though, whatever doping these things do to your body, I think a similar thing is happening to Luffy due to the heartbeat that he gets when he enters into Gear 5th. So how does all of this tie back into Sulong? Well, the first thing that jumps out at me is, if my assumption is true about the doping and the blood pressure, then I think the easiest explanation is that Sulongs go through a very similar process when they look at the moon. Looking at the moon brings out their animal instincts and they almost become rabid because they just can't control it. And maybe like the energy steroids in Gear 5th, their body increases heart rate or uses some kind of hormones to change their appearance and increase their strength and speed. This is somewhat backed up by the fact that only a handful of minks can even control it, and many of them just go out of control until they die from exhaustion, very similar to that of those who use the energy steroids. So if all of this is true, why does he need to do this to himself to be awakened? Why does he have to be doped up in order to unleash his imagination and stretch everything at will? And my guess here is, you just can't have one without the other. As in, if Luffy isn't doped up and laughing like a maniac from the altered heartbeat, then he wouldn't even be able to imagine himself affecting his surroundings and enemies. It's like he's halfway in a dream when he's in Gear 5th. I mean, take a look at how nonchalant he is when he's in this huge fight with Kaido. It's almost like he forgets that he's even there midair until he's about to get attacked. So without being in this state, I don't think that he can possibly imagine stretching the ground or even stretching his enemy. But on the other hand, I think I could also argue that he may not really even need to dope himself, and we have already seen that happen. And the best example of that is Jet Culverine. Kaido even said very clearly that rubber doesn't work that way when he attacked him with a Jet Culverine, which is kind of obvious because Luffy is not only stretching his arm endlessly, but he's bouncing it off of the air at almost 90-degree angles. Perhaps this is also part of the imagination aspect of his fruit. I mean, Luffy didn't have to stretch his imagination quite as much to believe that the Culverine could move like that because he was already so powered up in Gear 4th. I mean, if he shot out a regular Gum Gum pistol, it may not be quite as believable to him that his fist can bounce around at 90-degree angles and speed up and stretch forever. And similar to this, Gear 3 really shouldn't work as easily as it does. Bones aren't all one unit that air can travel through. While we could just chalk up Gear 3rd to typical anime absurdism, I think that this is also an example of Luffy making it easier to imagine something happening. While he shouldn't be able to pass air from bone to bone, the act of blowing it into one bone probably made his imagination believe that the air would keep moving, because let's face it, Luffy knows nothing about anatomy, and he probably just assumed that that's how bones worked. If Luffy fully understood that bones weren't one whole unit, then maybe Gear 3rd wouldn't work. But he probably thinks, if I can just blow into one, then I can move it around to the others, so it does work because he just imagines it. And I think this also makes sense with Zunisha as well. The sound of the heartbeat itself was the giveaway that Joy Boy has returned, so we know that Joy Boy could create the very same beat. That tells me that there has to be a key to this sound of the beat itself, and I personally find it more likely that it's just a rubber heart doping their body at the perfect rate to enable a form like Gear 5th, as opposed to some god ability taking over all of a sudden. But if you disagree, please let me know down below in the comments. And if you guys made it all the way to the end, then you must have liked it at least a little bit, so please drop a like and subscribe so I can keep bringing you awesome content just like this. Please check out one of these two videos that you should probably already see on the screen. Later.